How's the light?
Take me out one more time, as all you said.
Good morning. This is Tailinh Agoyo. I'm Tailinh Agoyo, and this is Rise and Thrive, Indigenous Art, Culture, and Joyful Acts of Resistance. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Avery Amaya, who is actually a friend and lives in Philadelphia and has a really fancy job, Chief Revenue Officer at Work Area Commerce. But we're not here today to talk about his work. I mean, if we do, that's cool, but we're actually here to talk about lacrosse, which Avery is very knowledgeable about the history of lacrosse and actually about what's happening in lacrosse in the world today. So Avery, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Anytime I get to spend time with you, I enjoy it. So two of my favorite things, spending time with you and talking about lacrosse.
Hey, so we're doing, the next hour is going to be really fabulous. Like I was saying before we started, I'm so, you know, when we see each other and our families get together, it's really fun. But we never really have a chance to like deep dive into this. And I know you're so knowledgeable, and you actually came to We Are the Seeds Philly, our first ever We Are the Seeds Philly, and were so gracious to do a presentation about lacrosse with your son Logan, and it was so wonderful and so well received, and something I think that surprised a lot of our visitors, you know, just that they didn't, a lot of people don't connect that lacrosse is an Indigenous sport, and that it is part of our, it's art, it's part of our culture in so many ways. So I'd like to just have you start talking about, you know, maybe touched upon what you brought to Seeds Philly, and then we'll move into other areas.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, what I brought to Seeds was really, you know, the focus of that event was really kind of Indigenous art and culture, generally speaking, for a broad group of attendees, right? And when you and I first talked, I was kind of like, well, it's a sport. Does it really have a place? But the more you learn and the more time you spend, it really is, it's a unique sport in so many ways. And I think at its core, it is a sport. I mean, it is a game that is played as a sport. But when you look at it historically, it is just, it's so unique, particularly for the Americas and particularly for Indigenous people. So, you know, one of the things we talked about there that, again, you already noted this, that a lot of people don't realize that lacrosse is Indigenous to the Americas. You know, it's, without getting too deep into the details there, we know that it's been around for thousands of years in some form or another, but you know, again, a lack of written history, the fact that all the lacrosse equipment is made with wood and you know, rawhide and leathers, the material wears away. So there's no real way to place a specific date on it, but we know it's been around for a really long time. And if you kind of fast forward all the way to more modern history, in just the 1800s, mid 1800s was when it really became adopted as a sport for people of European ancestry. I was trying to be a little PC there, but it was really, and really first and foremost by the Canadians. Another, you know, little known fact, hockey is not the national sport of Canada. Lacrosse is the national sport of Canada. And that goes all the way back to, I want to say the I think maybe 1860, around the 1860s, a guy by the name of Dr. Beers, William George Beers, was really the first person. He was a Canadian patriot. He was also a dentist, and was one of kind of, I think, you know, the term we'd use today would probably be a nationalist. He was really looking for Canada to have its own national identity. And part of that was really having a sport that was not soccer, that was not related to, you know, a French or English sport. And he saw what at that time was the you know, Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, playing their version of the game. And I'll get more into, maybe, you know, if we have time, the kind of different types of lacrosse and stickball. Lacrosse, the word itself, we'll come back to that. But he saw what the Haudenosaunee were playing, which is the Six Nations, the Iroquois Confederacy, the game they were playing, and basically took it, codified it, you know, gave rules to it, gave some structure to it that didn't exist before that, you know, to make it more acceptable for you know, European Canadians to play. and turned it into a game. And then shortly after that, wrote a book about it. And shortly after that, it became officially adopted as the national sport of Canada. So that was really the kind of the transition where you saw the game go from purely an indigenous sport to something that is the origin of what we see as the modern game today. So if you tune in, and catch any NCAA game, there's now at least there's three pro lacrosse leagues that play in the United States and some into Canada. And then I think Canada has a few different kind of flavors of some pro and semi-pro competitions. That's really where it all comes from.
Okay, so can we just put a hold on that for a second and just go back to when we talk about sport, right? And the word sport, and lacrosse had its origins. What was its meaning? And I just want to talk about the balance of sport and spirituality in Native culture, and not just in Iroquois culture, but even in South America and in Mexica culture. Like, sport in indigenous culture has always had attachment to a prayer or for the creator, playing for the creator.
Right. No, that's a really great point. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm still very, very much a novice student in that regard, just because there is so much to learn. And I've been really fortunate to, realize that I had some commonalities with some long-term friends, and also made a lot of new friends that are also, not just fans of lacrosse as an indigenous sport and from a historic perspective, and even a cultural perspective, but to your point, indigenous.
You mean culturally, culturally, even in our contemporary Native world. So when you're saying historical, we're talking about in Native culture.
Yeah.
So even now, I just want to clarify that.
Yeah. So maybe maybe we start with kind of really where it comes from. And again, a lot of this stuff is really, really deeply rooted in the culture, and I would even say spirituality, if not religion, of particularly, and again, this version of the game, the Six Nations people, and that goes back for as long as they've been around, right? There's a very common saying that an Onondaga or Mohawk child is born with a lacrosse. When they're born, they get a lacrosse stick in their crib, and it is absolutely a part of their core culture. And that is something, again, I think to where you're kind of going, that's been around and a part of that culture for thousands of years. And in this group in particular, remains a very modern part of their culture. When you look at international play, when you look at professional play, when you look at presence in top NCAA college and university programs, considering that across, and I'm right now I'm really focusing on the Haudenosaunee and the Six Nations, because that's really where that version of the game is highly concentrated. But you're talking about that entire group of folks. It's only maybe 150, 180,000 people in total, and yet their presence in terms of just really putting out stellar athletes is really impressive, for lack of a better term. But it still remains very much a part of their culture. You still see really frequently traditional style games, medicine games, which are very protected, are only for tribal members, and even follow their own kind of strict protocols and rules about who can play, what team you play for. It's related to family and matriarchy. So it's really interesting. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's a little bit difficult to learn, because it is it's closed, right? It's for them, and that's something I really try to respect, and but it's also really interesting and fun to learn. And then, as you noted, that's not just a thing that is specific. That version of the game, that flavor, that unique history does belong to the Haudenosaunee. But you also have different versions of stickball, or what we call lacrosse, which no indigenous people ever called lacrosse. As you might guess, that's a French word that was kind of given to the sport. But we'll kind of use that term for today. There's a Great Lakes style of play, which uses a slightly different stick, slightly different rules, but it's still, the concept of picking up a ball, passing it, and shooting it at a goal. There's another version that was really prominent through the southeastern United States. There was another version of stickball that used, again, a different style of stick. They almost look like long spoons, and they pick up a very small ball, pass it around, scoop it up. So those games are also still played today. So you can still see, the Choctaw are still making sticks in Oklahoma. They're still playing big games. You'll see games throughout the Southeast. There's national championships. So, and again, it's slightly different, but it's still very much a part of their culture and who they are as both sport and art, as the makers. And, we can talk about that.
I would love to talk about that.
How are we doing on time? Should I'm kind of going into another. I'm
No.
really just running.
I love it.
Just to kind of hit another aspect of it that you touched on, and going all the way back to the Seeds event, is just the artistic component, right? So if you look at the various styles of sticks, there are and I'm really focusing on the Americas because that's what I know. There's really a limited number of what I would call kind of master stick makers, people who really understand the art, understands its origins, and really are able to produce a stick, a modern style stick that can be used in a medicine game or in any, throwing around anywhere. But there's something to it. There's processes that are used. So over time, as lacrosse became more and more popular, the traditional methods of making a wooden lacrosse stick were progressed, and there were a number of large factories producing sticks, in the Mohawk Reservation and that whole part of the country, and they were producing thousands of sticks a year. So it did become kind of production, but that all died off with the invention of the plastic lacrosse heads. And now you're playing with aluminum shafts, you're playing with plastic heads. So it really kind of, all those places shut down. And so now it's really a lot of craftspeople, or again, community leaders who are committed to the sport that continue to make sticks, again, for different reasons. Some for commercial use, some for medicine games, various places that they play. But it's I definitely don't want to call it a dying art, because it's not, but it is a special art that very few people really specialize in.
So Avery, I want to touch on that. So you work with wood lacrosse sticks as an apprentice stick maker, right? And so you're really jumping in and understanding exactly what you're telling us about right now. I don't know if you posted this or I saw it somewhere else, and you're going to have to fill in the blanks because I'm going to probably get it wrong. But there was someone making a stick and saying, and this is for my grandson who's not born yet, and it embodies him, because I went into the woods and I got the wood for it, and I hunted the animal, and so does that resonate with you? I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was very like, this is about our family. Right.
So that's really interesting, and that is it. I think you summarized that really well, and that's probably a video I shared. And unfortunately, it's not a ceremony that I've ever been able to really participate in, but it is that you captured it really well. That's what it's about. It's about going out. For example, the vast majority of lacrosse sticks are made from hickory. And hickory is a sacred wood for a lot of indigenous people. So part of the practice is going out, selecting the tree, finding connection with that tree, harvesting the tree, trimming it down, splitting the wood, bending the wood. And there's a few different ways that you do that, but that's one of the trickier parts of the practice. Shaping the wood, creating the strings for it. And again, what we use now, and I'll pull one up so I can kind of show, like, this is a modern version of a traditional stick that is really kind of intended to look and feel like a modern stick, but uses a lot of the same kind of concepts. So if you can think back a couple hundred years, you really had to go and harvest, so many different parts from an animal and from a tree to be able to make this. And so it was special, and it was something that was given with a lot of pride and it's, again, not just cultural, but spiritual effect. So, yeah, it's you again. I think you summarize it really well. That is the practice, and that's how special it is to many people. For me, and what how I kind of got to where I am learning to make
Yeah.
sticks. There are so few people that can really teach how to make lacrosse sticks. And the vast majority are really concentrated in, Northeast, the northern parts of New York and crossing into Canada, again, in that Six Nations area. There's a handful of people in the Midwest. There's a handful of folks around the country, but you would really need to go and kind of seek those folks out and be there and hope that they would take you on as an apprentice. And again, for cultural reasons, and a lot of times a guy like me would never really make it through the door, because forget whether or not I'm indigenous enough, I'm not of their tribe, I'm not of their people. So again, those are things we just have to respect and deal with. But I was really a big fan, I'm really a big student, and just happened to luck out, and really, really lucked out. I hadn't been living in Philly very long. I'm originally from Colorado, and we'd moved around before landing in Philly, but hadn't been in Philly all that long when I went up to a lacrosse event, the Lake Placid tournament up in Lake Placid, New York. Ran into a guy who was selling wooden lacrosse sticks, traditional style wooden lacrosse sticks, and started chatting with him. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm based in Philly." And I was like, "Wait, what did you just say?" I was like, "You're based in Philly?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's nuts." And so figured out he was right in Fishtown, which is for those
No way.
Philly, it's a Philly neighborhood that's right next to the neighborhood I was living in, Northern Liberty. So it was really interesting. We had that initial connection. And then it took me probably another year and a half of hounding him to get him to give me any attention. And I finally, it's actually a pretty fun story. I
think he said he was listening today. So
oh, good. All right, good. I'll try not to mess this up. So I finally got him to have a beer with me. He's a really nice guy, but he's super motivated. He's always got stuff going on. And so I finally got him to have a beer with me, and he kind of knew it was coming. And we sat down and I told him, he's like, "So, really, where's your head at? What do you want to do?" I was like, "I'd like to be an apprentice, your apprentice." I'm really, and I, shared with him kind of my passion for the sport, my passion for the history, the fact that, again, it is one of those few sports that genuinely has a spiritual origin to it. The idea that every time you pick up a lacrosse stick, you can play the creator's game, and you can play for the creator, and that's a personal choice that any athlete can choose to do. So I shared some with him. I asked him if he would consider taking me on as an apprentice. And he looked at me and he goes, "Well," and keep in mind, he's probably 15 years younger than me. He looks at me and goes, "Well, I always thought I would take on an apprentice, but you're not what I pictured." So he kind of thought about it. We had, we finished our beers, and we kept talking over the following weeks. And eventually he said, we had to work out kind of some special circumstances and timing, because I do have a full-time job and kids and all that stuff, but he's been really accommodating. And he's really interesting because this is his business. This is his livelihood. This is what he does for a living, is makes incredibly beautiful lacrosse sticks, and he has a couple full-time employees that are really appreciative for the work too, and are also amazing artists in their own right. But he's not someone who just purely does it for commercial reasons. He's incredibly respectful of the indigenous history and of other indigenous stick makers. And without getting too deep into it, I really, again, I lucked out finding somebody that not only could teach me and was willing to do that, but that also shared kind of my perspective and my appreciation for that history and the culture, and again, the respect. So yeah, that's so I get to work with him. It's been really slow. I haven't been able to do a lot of work with him during COVID for all the reasons that everyone knows. But when I do get into the shop and work with him, he's an amazing teacher. And again, he has two other folks that work with him, and I get to learn from them as well. So his name is Justin Skaggs. The place is woodlacrossesticks.com, Skaggs Woodworks, and another guy I work with, Rich Snow. So yeah, it's amazing, and I'm really lucky to have access. And he's also incredibly connected. So he was able to get to be in communication with an iconic stick maker, Alf Jacques, who is a Haudenosaunee, and is just legendary. He is synonymous with kind of traditional stick making. The guy is just a legend. He also was able to learn some from Jack Johnson, who's another indigenous stick maker. But he's an amazing student. He's really an inspiration for me because I'm speaking about Justin now. He travels all over the country. Just this last summer, pre-COVID, or maybe it was in the fall. Recently, pre-COVID, he went out to Oklahoma and studied, spent a couple weeks with Choctaw stick makers, really learning, kind of their whole practice, and then in turn taught them how to make his sticks. So it was really just a neat cultural exchange and getting to see a different aspect of, indigenous stickball in another form. So
that's wonderful. Okay, so that's Wood Lacrosse Sticks, woodlacrossesticks.com, right?
Correct.
Okay, so we're going to take a break, and we come back. I want to talk more about, I actually want to touch upon Warhorse Lacrosse Club, which you're a part of and advocate for. So when we come back, we'll do that. This is Tailinh Agoyo on Rise and Thrive on USLA Media. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
Being prepared is a part of who you are, but it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you go in an emergency. Build a kit with the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies. Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Sí, tenía miedo. No sabía si iba a poder hacerlo.
Encuentra clases gratis para adultos cerca de ti en completatudiploma.org.
And we're back. This is Tailinh on Rise and Thrive. I'm here with Avery and Amaya, and we're talking about lacrosse, which is so fantastic to have this opportunity to really jump in and explore this with you, Avery, because I know it's so much of a passion for you. And as we've been friends for a few years here in Philly and worked together a bit, you've brought up a lot of, like, you've invited us to check out Warhorse Lacrosse Club. You've invited us to Wings games, and the kids have gone along, and it's so much a part of your life and your family's life. So first, I'd just love to ask, how did this passion evolve for you? And then since you've come to Philly and you've affiliated yourself with a lot of people who are involved with lacrosse, what's that like? Like, what's life like in Philly lacrosse?
Yeah, I'm happy to share all of that, especially my lacrosse origin story, because it is incredibly unremarkable. I did grow up in a sports family, our family in particular. I have a brother who was a 2-time state champ in wrestling. My dad was a Division I wrestler. He went on to be a Division I wrestler. My 2 other brothers were also outstanding wrestlers and athletes across the boards. But sports was very, very much a part of our family, our core family. My dad was the first person in our family to attend college and graduate from college, and that was all thanks. Wrestling opened the door for him. And this was in a time where Latinos and guys with brown skin were not getting a lot of opportunities to go to college. This was in the early days of the civil rights movement. And so it was not an easy thing for my dad to do. And I'm the oldest of 6 kids. So I was born while he was still in college. And so I really got to kind of see him grow up and see and experience a lot of that story. So wrestling was our main sport. We were a wrestling family through and through. I started wrestling when I was 4, and likewise for all my siblings. And my dad would probably say that it was optional that we wrestled, but I don't think that's I'm pretty sure it was mandatory. And so I wrestled my whole life. Was fairly competitive, had some level of success, nothing stellar, but it was definitely part of who I was, remains a part of who I am. Also played football, and that was a fun sport. That was kind of like wrestling was where I went and did work. Football was that one season where I got to take a break and go play a game, and it was fun and silly. And I mean no disrespect to any football players, but it's a very different type of work, wrestling and football. So fast forward to college, I didn't have any amazing offers to go wrestle. I had a bunch of kind of D3 opportunities. Even I think at that point there were still NAIA schools. Same with football. A few people wanted me, but nothing D1. And I was a very good student. So I ended up going a different route, and I went to the University of Colorado Boulder on an academic scholarship, and happened to end up, and I was going to club wrestle there. But again, they didn't have a varsity wrestling program. In fact, since my dad went there, my dad attended the University of Colorado Boulder and wrestled there on this wrestling scholarship before, unfortunately, they terminated the program for Title IX. But so I end up at CU. I end up with a roommate, a guy I'd never met before, and he's a lacrosse player. So he was a Korean guy. His name was Chang-Hoon Lee, and really quiet, kind of kept to himself, but he had a couple of lacrosse sticks, and he said, I don't know anybody here. Will you go throw around on the field with me? Because I want to try out for the CU club team. I was like, yeah, sure. So I went out and threw around with him, started learning about the game. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard of it, but it was certainly the first time I ever put my hands on a lacrosse stick. At that time in Colorado, lacrosse was not a sport that everyone got exposed to. In fact, I think with the exception of a handful of private prep schools in the Denver area, maybe Colorado Springs, it really wasn't around. So trying to make a long story short-ish, I just really fell in love with it. And I was super excited to go out and play with him any chance I got, and started kind of picking up a little of my own equipment. And Chang eventually talked me into trying out for the club team. And I think a lot of times when you picture a club team, you picture, 20, 30 people showing up, no coach, roughshod equipment. CU, even back in 1992, 93, when I showed up for tryouts, there were probably 60, 65 guys. They had a full-time paid head coach. They had a really impressive group of assistant coaches. It was a very serious program. I had very, very little skill in terms of lacrosse. And a big part of it, as you might imagine, is just the time it takes to develop the coordination to catch and throw a ball with a lacrosse stick. And I had none of that. So I tried out for the team. I kind of made the squad, but I wasn't getting to play in any games. I was, basically like a kind of a third string midfielder. And then turn of events, our first string goalie got hurt. Our second string goalie got hurt. Our third string goalie was put in cage, and the coach was like, hey, we need somebody else to step up and be ready to play in case he gets hurt. And not a lot of people raised their hand to play lacrosse goalie, and I decided to do it. And that ended up just being a position I fell in love with. So I played for the next couple of years at CU. I transferred to the university. I did a semester at Fort Lewis College. I played there. I played at the University of Northern Colorado, all on club teams. So it was just a chance to be around the game all the time. Played in a couple men's leagues out there. And it just, through all of that, very, very much became my favorite sport. Because it's a wonderful sport in the sense that, like football, it's a contact sport. It's not, but I'll quote Coach AJ, who's the head coach and organizer for the Warhorse program. He describes it as a contact sport as opposed to a collision sport. So it's still rough. You still get a lot of good activity, but it's not the head-to-head collisions as much as you get in football. So, and it's just fun. It is just the funnest game I've ever played. I'm happy every time I get to pick up a stick. So I got to play through all that time period, but there was another aspect to it. And this is something you and I have talked about in more kind of personal conversations, but just growing up in a Chicano family, which is very much how we identified. My dad's very brown. My mom's a lot less brown, but she's Blackfoot on her side. We have Comanche and Seminole on my dad's side, but we have no tribal affiliation. There was no, my great grandmother spoke 5 or 6 languages, including multiple indigenous languages. But none of that was passed forward to us. We have no tribal affiliation, but we did have the knowledge that that was a part of who we were. So it's always a funny thing as a Chicano, again, someone who identifies as Chicano, particularly in a household where that was a big part of who we were. It's like kind of finding your place and understanding what is the Native American history for me? How much may I identify with that? How do I identify with that? And so even from the earliest days, part of one of my underlying motivations was this kind of like little secret that I kept to myself, that even though, again, I'm not a Six Nations person, I knew that part of the story to some degree. And I knew that I got to play a game that was indigenous to this country, that was a Native American sport. And so that kind of was the frosting on the cake for me.
So it made you feel connected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I really fell in love with lacrosse. I ended up, and we don't need to spend any time on this, but I ended up getting into a different sport. After wrestling, after lacrosse, I started playing paintball, and I ended up playing semi-pro and professional paintball for 7 years. And that became the center of my universe. I worked in that industry. I traveled all over the world playing.
I did not know.
Oh yeah. That's story for another time. But it was really fun. And it like sport, it opened a lot of doors for me. It helped me form a lot of really amazing connections. It was again, I worked for a company. I played professionally, not making hardly any money at all playing, but it did take me all over the world. So that was a really special gift of sport again. But then when that kind of paintball journey ended and I was done playing, I was like, all right, what do I do? And so I was kind of dabbling in all kinds of different sports. And again, just having done sports since I was 4 years old, I always felt kind of lost without it. My son had started playing lacrosse. And so I caught myself doing that dad thing where I was trying to live vicariously through him. And I was like, that's not going to work. So decided to start playing again. So I still play today. I play box lacrosse with a couple of teams, and I play some field lacrosse with a master's team when I get a chance. And so it's still a big part of my life.
So let's talk about Warhorse Lacrosse Club.
So I mentioned that my son plays lacrosse, and a quick kind of sidestep for anyone who doesn't know, Philly has an amazingly rich lacrosse history. I would venture to say that, go so far as to say that Philadelphia for a long time has been a hotbed of lacrosse talent, lacrosse programs, just some of the very best club, prep school, high school programs, college programs are really all based out of this area. So, being from the area, I'm going to say that we absolutely would rival the state of Maryland and upstate New York and Long Island in terms of just the concentration of talent in this area. Now I've got a 10-year-old, so I can say that with a lot more knowledge. When he was little and I was new to the area, I kind of knew it was out there, but it wasn't very accessible, particularly living in the city. The lot of the lacrosse is really in the surrounding area, not so much in the city.
Right.
So I was really trying to find different places for him to play and figure out how to access it. There's another local program that was born out of the Philly area called Nxt Lacrosse or Nxt Lacrosse, but it's just NXT. And they run some really great programs they call Cradle Lacrosse, where it's just very basic kind of skill development, getting kids exposed to having a lacrosse stick in their hand and playing little games before they try to, prep kids to actually play the game. So he had been doing these Cradle programs, and we were enjoying those and looking forward to kind of figuring out how to navigate the rest of it. And my kids went to school in Northwest Philly, which was probably 5 miles from where we live. So we're doing this commute every day, and there's a place called the Croc Center, the Salvation Army Croc Center. It's very much like a YMCA. So it's a really beautiful, brand new YMCA. That's basically what the Croc Center was. And they offered all kinds of after-school programs. So our kids were doing orchestra and homework zone there. And one day we're walking out with both the kids, and I just look over to the right, and I see a group. That day it had to have been 35, 40, primarily African-American kids. all playing lacrosse on a field, everything from little tiny guys to high school kids. And I just was like, stopped dead in my tracks. I was like, oh my God, I need to know what's going on. And so I took the kids over and I interrupted one of the coaches and I was like, excuse me, do you run this for? He's like, no, it's actually the guy up on the hill. So I went over and I waited about 15 seconds before rudely interrupting him. I was like, I just need a card or something. I need to know what is happening here. And that guy is a guy named Arthur Johnson. AJ is what he goes by. And he was running a program called Northwest Lacrosse, which was part of a nonprofit organization called TREF, the Re-Education Foundation. And with a focus on exposing kids to alternative sports, in the city, in less developed areas, and also providing tutoring and mentoring. So he's just this amazing educator, athlete, and I, to try to make this also a shorter story, really just got to know him, got Logan involved with that program right away, and absolutely loved everything about it and everything that he was doing, and the idea that, again, when we talk about lacrosse, I think if you were to ask the average person if they know lacrosse, if it's a yes, they're probably, and I hate to say this, but it's true. I think most people picture, wealthy, upper middle class or upper class white kids playing in the suburbs. They picture, Johns Hopkins and Duke University. And there's certainly a persona and a stereotype that exists within lacrosse that it does not fit with what I want lacrosse to be. Not to say that all those stereotypes are by any stretch of the imagination true, but they exist. And so I love any chance to kind of challenge those. And I love when somebody else is doing that as well. And so that's what AJ was doing with his Northwest program. That's what Harlem Lacrosse is doing out in New York. And there's so many other programs like that around the country that are really trying to expose the sport to a different group of people that have been, have been historically playing the game for the last 30, 40 years. So I got to know AJ, got Logan into the program, was able to do a little bit of coaching with some of the younger guys. I'm not the same caliber of coach that he has for his older kids, but I was able to work with some of the little ones. And then really got more involved with him on helping organize. And then AJ did something that was really amazing. He was able to reach out to, you mentioned the Wings earlier, a legendary Wings player and arguably one of the greatest box lacrosse players in particular ever to play the game, a guy by the name of Kevin Crowley. So Kevin Crowley is originally from Vancouver, but he plays for the Philadelphia Wings, and at the time was also playing MLL with the New York Lizards. MLL is one of the professional field lacrosse programs, but he's based in Philly. And Kevin would frequently come out to our practices and jump in and play with us and, just be there with the kids. And most of the time the kids had no idea who he was, but he would just come out just to be with us. And so AJ was able to really establish a strong relationship with him and came up with the idea that they should rebuild the program and leverage kind of Kevin's name and his interest in promoting the sport. So they basically relaunched the program as Warhorse Lacrosse, and I was lucky to be kind of a founding member of that program and help with just behind the scenes stuff in terms of organizing, communication, helping with the website, helping communicate with other teams, and continue to do that today. And AJ and Kevin are both two of the just most generous people and promoters of the game. There's a common saying that you hear in lacrosse, and it's grow the game. A lot of people say it, not everyone really does it. My God, Kevin Crowley and AJ Arthur Johnson are two people that have really put a lot into that effort. So
it's incredible. Yeah. And I follow, you post a lot about it, and I follow that, and they are doing some incredible work, and they are a nonprofit still, right? So if people want to support or donate, how would they go about doing that?
Go to warhorselacrosse.com, and it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'd really love to move into talking about you had mentioned, I don't remember what it's called, International Indigenous Games?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is, if I can, I just kind of want to plug something that another friend was the primary organizer for, and I helped promote him. He's organized, he is promoting International Indigenous Games Day, which is on October 10th. And while today we've been talking about lacrosse, and that would certainly fall into that realm, Really, his goal is to focus on truly global indigenous games. So the work that he's put out, he's asking that kids or people in general go out leading up to October 10th and just do a Google search. Go in and say, you know, indigenous Irish game, indigenous German games, and, you know, anywhere you want in the world, maybe that has to do with your ancestry or where you are. And again, lacrosse is a really easy one to jump into. And then learn what you can, you know, do some independent research, learn how to play the game, practice a little bit. Then on October 10th, the goal is to get as many people around the world to go out, make a video of themselves practicing or playing their indigenous sport, whatever that sport may be, and then hashtagging it with International Indigenous Games Day, which is a really long hashtag, but that's the goal.
It's so cool. It's such a great idea, and I hope that they get a lot of participation. And it's so much fun. It's a fun thing that we can all do collectively, globally, in this ridiculous time that we're in.
Right. Exactly.
You know, just get outside and try something new and share and learn. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, and I talked about a few other generous people. I want to say that Dan and Susan Ninham, who are based in Minnesota, they're both just educators and community leaders, incredible coaches. Dan was a really successful basketball coach, but they're the primary organizers for this, and they're constantly promoting indigenous sports. They do a lot of curriculum development. Primarily because that's where they are in Minnesota, Wisconsin, where they're bringing, again, not just lacrosse, but various indigenous games into the classroom for all students to have access to. So they just do some really amazing work.
They do some great work, and also even telling the stories of indigenous athletes through social media. Dan is a writer, and he's Indian Sports. I think it's Indian Sports on Instagram is the handle, or indiansports.com, NDN. It's so wonderful to see through your feed every day a focus and highlight on indigenous athletes. And, you know, and more exciting for me is to see a lot of girls and women in the mix. And it's so nice that that's being highlighted. And maybe it's a small town team, but it's the superstar, and we would never know that here, but through the power of social media and thanks to Dan, and that we can have access to that kind of information. And it's very empowering.
And their organization, in case anybody wants to learn more, is Northern Indigenous Games. And again, Dan and Susan Ninham. So they keep an eye out for the work that they do.
Yeah, it's worth it. Check them out. We're going to take another break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Ireland. We're going to talk about what's going on with that. And we're just going to chat about life, you know. All right, this is Tailinh, Rise and Thrive. We'll be back. Thanks, Niall. All right. Yay.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. I have a mentor, and she convinced me to continue my education. No one receives a diploma alone. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Our hearts are made stronger by how we treat others.
Put her there.
The light you share can impact those around you, but so can the darkness.
Later, twerps! Did Pete saying mean things bother you?
So when you reach out to another person, take a moment to consider how they will feel and let your heart be the key to making a difference. Because of you, someone's entire day, year, or even life can change.
In every heart, there's hope.
Hey, and we're back with Avery and Amaya, and we're having such a fun conversation about lacrosse and Indigenous sport and life in Philly and all these good things. It's so great to see you, first of all, and to catch up, honestly. It's been since December, probably, and like 150 years ago, basically, in COVID times.
Yeah.
So it is nice to chat. But what's going on in the world? What is it called? The global indigenous, I'm not saying it right. You say it.
No. Well,
there was a big controversy, and then Ireland stepped up.
Yeah, so this is just really interesting. And again, I think speaks to how special the lacrosse community is. Again, defying some of the stereotypes that have been applied to the game. So basically, in terms of international play, there's a handful of organizations that organize international play. One of the goals is across the global lacrosse community has been to try to get lacrosse back into the Olympics. It was in there, 100 years ago in the early days for just a couple of rounds, and then it's been out forever. And so there's just been a tremendous amount of work from a global lacrosse community to try to work back to getting into the Olympics. So to fast forward to kind of the end, we're really on a great track, and there's a lot of good indicators that there's a real likelihood that lacrosse could reappear at the 2028 games, which would be just monumental. And I think is a lot of people have worked to make that their life's goal. But leading up to that, there's been a lot of, part of it was first having these just organized international games to grow the game, right? To grow the sport. And then as the Olympic dream started to become more and more realistic, that started to get more formalized.
Right.
You have to develop relationships with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, et cetera, et cetera. So the next games, they call it the World Games. The World Games is held every 4 years, the year after the Olympics, but it kind of follows the same model. They have a formal relationship with the IOC in the World Games, and I'm not super knowledgeable on this stuff, so I couldn't go too deep, but it's about 3,500 athletes. I think it's 34, 35 different unique sports that are played, but one of them is lacrosse, and men's and women's lacrosse. And in the men's lacrosse, they only accepted, I think it is, I have a note here, what was it, 8 teams, I think? Yeah, I think they only invited 8 teams, and those teams were invited based on their performance at the 2018 Federation of International Lacrosse Championships, and you had to be one of the top teams to play there. So you had to accept the invitation and then be there. So what's really interesting though is if you think about, and this is where, again, lacrosse is just really interesting, is that actually, let me pause.
Yeah.
The Iroquois were not invited to play, despite finishing 3rd at the FIL championships. They had a really strong showing. They finished 3rd behind the United States and Canada, which has kind of been their history for a long time when it comes to lacrosse. But they had a really strong finish. They dominated everyone else, but they were number 3. They should have absolutely been invited, but they are not recognized by the international, not just lacrosse community, but the IOC as a sovereign nation. So if you're not a sovereign nation, how can you have a national team? So the 6 nations, the Haudenosaunee, play as the Iroquois Nationals, representing a nation, right? An autonomous nation. So because they were not recognized as such, they did not receive an invitation. And basically the lacrosse world about blew up. I think, it was really all anybody talked about. There was some professional lacrosse played this year in the PLL, which is the Professional Lacrosse League, MLL, which is Major League Lacrosse. And you saw a lot of like stickers and patches and players speaking up about how wrong this was. That how can you have an international lacrosse tournament and not invite the people that created the game? It was asinine. And so because of the big uproar, the World Games, which is run by the International World Games Association, said, okay, we're reconsidering, but they need to meet a couple of other qualifications. And one of them was, okay, we've reconsidered and we'll let them in, but there's still only 8 spots. and they don't have one of them. So what are we going to do? 8 other teams had already accepted. So this is where just the amazing sportsmanship came into play. The Irish national team, who finished 12th at the FIL championship, so it had one of the 8 spots, saw what was happening, knew the history, and were irate. They were really upset by just this. Again, it was just an absurd situation. And so they stepped up and said, we will give up our spot so the Iroquois Nationals can play in this event. And that was, again, that's pretty much all anybody is talking about right now in the lacrosse community, because it was just such, I mean, you think about it, this wasn't just one person's decision. You're talking about people who have been playing this game forever. Right. It was a chance to go and play on, since there's no Olympics, this is the highest, the biggest amateur stage that you could possibly play on. So you had to have agreement across all those team players, all those families, all those coaches to say that they're going to sacrifice that opportunity to make a spot for someone else who deserves it. So that was just
beautiful.
Really, really was. So that has all just unfolded in the last week. I think it was just the middle of last week that Ireland stepped up and did that. So that was really great. I'm curious to see how this is going to carry forward, because again, it's as we get closer and closer to 2028 and the next FIL championship, how will this all play out? And going into the Olympics, will the Haudenosaunee and the Iroquois Nation try to play as an autonomous nation, or will they have to kind of try to split their players and go try to play for the US and Canadian teams? I have no idea how that's going to go, but it's really a unique scenario. And again, I think the very best part of the story is just what the Irish team did, because it speaks volumes about who they are.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable. So we only have a few minutes left. So I just want to check in. Oh, did you hear that? I'm getting some terrible feedback. We did so great. And all of a sudden I'm getting this terrible feedback. Not feedback in terms of like criticizing the show. It's just in my ear.
I'm not getting anything.
Okay, no, it's stopped. All right. Okay, so good. So in the next few minutes, I would love to talk about Logan's interest in, because Logan helped out at Seeds, showing this different sticks that you had, and you have so many cool different variations of the sticks. And what, in this COVID life, like, how are you managing? How are you, I know Logan's playing lacrosse now. And so like, that must be such a nice, refreshing change from the first few months of everything.
Yeah. And again, I have to just express gratitude for the sport in general, for all the clubs and organizers and administrators who worked hard to make it happen. For young kids, this whole COVID thing has been such a really challenging experience for everyone, and certainly those who experience health issues and loss. So I don't want to diminish any of that, but at an individual level and at our family level, and I think a lot of other families can identify with this, you're just, kids need to socialize. They want to be active. They want to do things. And there's only so much time they want to spend with mom and dad. And so it was really difficult. But a couple of the programs really, as soon as they got the kind of legal thumbs up, the green light to be able to organize some of these sports, they were incredibly efficient and strict and thoughtful with their protocols, because it really started out, I remember the first time we went out and played lacrosse, or he went out and played lacrosse, they had it so that it was like 7 players per 1 coach. Everybody wore masks to and from the field. And keep in mind, lacrosse is as far as sports go, I think on the safer side, something maybe along the lines of like, they're comparable to tennis, just with distance. You have a stick. You're never picking up the ball with a bare hand and sharing it with another player. So you've got a stick, you've got gloves, you've got a helmet, you've got distance. So there was already some just kind of natural elements that made it a slightly safer option. But then they basically kind of set up these protocols. It was like 6 or 7 players per little group. They had 1 coach. They broke the fields up into quarters. They had separate entrances for each quadrant of the field. They staggered the start times across. It was incredibly well organized. And that in particular was the NXT program that he belongs to. And Warhorse also was really thoughtful in the way they were able to bring kids out and social distance and have strict rules to allow kids to get out and play and give families a break. But it was just, I remember the first practices we went to, we'd just come back in and be like, oh my God, I forgot how fun this is. And it was just such a relief and a gift for us. And then as things, you know, as the numbers started getting better and it became safer and safer, there's still a lot of protocols. They did adjust the format of the games. They made a lot of rules, like only one parent per athlete, so you didn't have, you know, busy sidelines. But we were able to actually go and travel and do some events in Maryland, Delaware, around Pennsylvania. And so it was wonderful. And again, this whole area, particularly from, you know, greater Philadelphia down to Maryland, is just, there's just so many wonderful programs and a lot of different focuses and different levels of play. So yeah, it was a blessing.
It's really nice to hear positive ways that groups have adapted and enabled us to negotiate COVID in a very safe way for our families. So that's a nice success story. It's nice. And it's nice to see, I follow Logan's Instagram page, and it's great just to see there's this freedom and lightness that's returning to the kids, you know, even though we're all really still being very diligent and safe, but it does. And it's nice that the sport has given him those opportunities to feel some degree of normalcy. Yeah. So we're wrapping up. This was so great, Avery. It was really nice to see you and to chat about all these wonderful, important, beautiful things. And I really appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, this is Rise and Thrive, Indigenous Art, Culture, and Joyful Acts of Resistance on Whistler Media. We'll be back. This repeats, so check the website if you want to listen to a rebroadcast. But we'll be back next Thursday at 11 with a new guest. Have a great week, everyone.